Well, I had conscious memory of a certain amount of the 1967 encounter, and I saw an article in a local newspaper put in by Dr. J. Allen Hynek's organization, and they were requesting any information concerning UFOs. And I thought, well, maybe that reddish-orange light had something to do with UFOs. I knew very little about the subject.
What happened to Betty was revealed through a long series of hypnotic sessions. It was through these sessions that Betty began to discover that she had had contact with alien beings throughout her childhood.
This was when I was 13 years old. It took place in Westminster, Massachusetts. It was in the backyard of my home. And I was going up into the woods, up some wooden steps my father had made, and I looked off to the right-hand side of me, and when I did, I saw it looked like a moon, but it was getting bigger and bigger and coming closer and closer to me. That's the only conscious memory I had of it at this time. And then under regressive hypnosis, I found out that I had been picked up by a craft at that time.
But that wasn't the end of Betty's experiences with the beings. 17 years later, they returned. And this time, they visited her home.
They told me that they needed knowledge tried by fire, and the only thing I could think of that was knowledge tried by fire was the Bible. And so we went into the living room, and I saw my mother and my children just sitting there in a state of suspended animation.
As Betty made her way outside and into the spacecraft, she had little idea of what awaited her.
The only part of the experience I didn't care for was the needles that the beings used on me. They said that they had to measure me and physically measure me rather than examine me. When they did, they thrust a needle into my left nostril up into my head, and I felt it break through. It was very painful.
Betty's amazing story can be read in the books The Andreasson Affair and The Andreasson Affair Phase 2. Unfortunately, the story hasn't ended there for Betty. Bob Luker, Betty's husband, believes both he and Betty are continually being monitored by unusual flying objects. Only this time, it might be from our own government.
I couldn't help but notice that these aircraft were all black. They were totally unmarked. They showed no numbers whatsoever, and they flew at extremely low altitudes, all of which are illegal. It got to a point where even some of our neighbors were documenting these flights. So we thought, well, maybe it could be coincidence, maybe we're just in a flight path. But within a year, we moved to another home in Cheshire, Connecticut. Within 2 days of the time we moved to Cheshire, Connecticut, these flights of helicopters started to come over our house, even did figure eights at altitudes sometimes less than 200 feet.
Now, Mrs. Andreasson, you were on the spacecraft. They had examined you. Do you have any physical scars or any evidence that you were examined?
Well, I went for x-rays of my head and everything, and there were no breaks in the bone. However, the doctor said something as far as finding out about anything in the membrane, any scar or anything like that. I would have to go through a different type of x-ray, and the radiation level was quite high, and he didn't feel as if I should do that because unless I had a tumor or something like that. You know.
All right. Okay, I want to get back to your story now. They examined you. Obviously, you were in some pain, or at least you were starting to show signs of fear then. What did they do after they had examined you?
Well, after they had examined me, they took me back to the cubicle where they told me to change into my regular clothes, and from there I was escorted into this room that appeared like a Quonset hut-type room, half cylindrical. And within it were 8 glass-like chairs, and they sat me down in the one of the chairs to the right, and this hood, glass-like hood, came down, and I could hear it click around me, and then I felt very cold, as if I was freezing, and it seemed as if I was there for a very long time. And from there I was taken and put into another chair to the left, and again this glass-like hood came down and sealed around me, and I could hear the snap, and they also put some tubes in my nose, and I could hear it, as they put them into the glass, I could hear it seal, like, and also a tube for my mouth, and they told me to keep my eyes closed, and they gave me this reddish color liquid to take, and it tasted very sweet. I felt very relaxed from it. And meanwhile, this gray liquid fell down, was falling on my head, and it was filling up in the bottom of the chair, and when it was filled, it vibrated like a whirlpool round about me, and from there, they drained that out, took the breathing tubes out, and set me on this track where one being was in front of me and one being was in back of me. And at this point, they had their different uniform. It was a sort of a shiny aluminum type uniform, and they put two black hoods on their heads. And we went out of this room into a very dark black tunnel that seemed as if it was chipped out of stone, and there were other entrances. I could tell because their uniform sent off like a bright light, and I could see like darker holes off to the sides. And
did you start thinking that maybe these weren't angels after all at this point?
I didn't know what it was. I really didn't know.
But the term alien still didn't cross your mind?
I wasn't.
Yeah.
You
weren't in that frame of mind, obviously.
No, I wasn't aware of UFOs.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So anyway, I was taken through this tunnel, and we were coming up to a mirror, and I thought we were going to crash right through the mirror, and instead we passed just like we passed through the wood in my home. And we came into this red atmosphere, and in this red atmosphere there was no vegetation. There were just large buildings with square windows, and there were these strange creature-like beings having like two stalks for a head with very large eyes on the end of them. And they were crawling all over the walls and in and out of the windows and all over the place. And as I said, the two beings had hoods, these black hoods on, and evidently they thought that my head felt very heavy. Evidently they thought my black hair was covering enough for me that I,
didn't need anything else.
So we passed through this area into a green atmosphere, and it was beautiful. It was just fantastically beautiful. There were things there I can't even describe today. They, nothing that I could relate to in this in planet Earth, and so I saw different things there. A dome city.
This was obviously their planet, then?
No, this was not their planet. They told me that this was the high place. The highest place.
All right.
They had told me their planet, the name of their planet, but I couldn't pronounce it. There was too many consonants in it. I've tried.
Did they say it was in this galaxy or in another, or
they gave some writings, but I'm not really aware of what they are. I just passed them on into the investigators. And in this high place, this green atmosphere was just beautiful. And I came up to some crystals that were just hanging in midair, and I did become fearful. I wanted to go back at that point because it was awesome, and they just wouldn't go along with my request, and we kept on going until we came to this area where this large bird stood, and the beings just got off the track, and I was left there alone where this huge bird was, and it was alive, and there was light in back of it just radiating, kept on radiating, and I kept getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and these sparks of gold were flying around in front of me, and I felt like I was being consumed by fire. And at that point I must have passed out or something, because the next time I looked, the bird was gone, and there was a pile of ashes there, and out of these pile of ashes a large gray worm appeared. And then from the side a voice spoke to me, a very loud voice, and called my name twice and said, "You have seen and you have heard, do you understand?" And I said, I don't know, I don't understand, I don't even know why I was there. And then the voice talked with me and reassured me that everything was all right, that some of the pain that I experienced was because of my fear, and I just felt better. I felt elated, and joy filled me. I felt very happy at that particular point, and then the voice told me I would have to return, and I was taken back by the being.
To Earth?
Yes.
I believe they also gave you a book.
Yes.
Is that true?
There was an exchange of the Bible, and they passed me a blue book, which they said I could have for 10 days, and to look within it and grasp as much as I could possibly grasp, and I was not to show it to anyone. However, I did show my daughter, Becky, which I shouldn't have, and when she put her hand on it, her hand sort of glowed, and after 9 or 10 days, the book was gone.
Gone, disappeared,
Yeah.
just into thin air. Mr. Fowler, have you heard any stories similar to this one?
Everything that Betty has said has a similar parallel to other cases, except the anomaly, I guess would call it, of the bird experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know what to make about the bird experience. The only thing that relates internally with a bird is that these aliens had a similar bird insignia or symbol on their shoulders, you know, and whether this was an induced hallucination, an object lesson that was set up, I really don't know. You almost could draw an analogy to a South Sea Islander, for example, who drifted out to sea and was out to sea for many, many days in his canoe, and he sees this huge aircraft carrier coming, and they send a small boat, they pick him up, they bring him back, they give him a physical examination, they put him in the hospital, and then when he's resuscitated, they bring him to the day room, and he sees movies, he sees TV, all these modern inventions. And then they take a helicopter, they bring him back, they dump him on the beach, and he goes back and tries to relate this whole thing in terms of his own religion, his philosophy, within a limited... you know, people would think he was probably crazy.
About the book, how much do you remember? They asked you to grasp what you could. What was in it that you remember?
Well, the first 3 pages were very bright light. There were approximately 40 pages. It was very thin paper. The writings on it, there were symbols, there were numbers, there was strange writing, there were pictures of the workings of the craft. There were just so many different things, and they've come forth, and I just handed them to the investigators for them I don't know what they are.
In other words, you handed the notes that you took on it, or
the different things that have been revealed to me.
Yeah.
I've just passed the writings and things over to the investigators. Also, my daughter Becky is able to write the same strange writing that was in the book, and at a few occasions I have been able to too. And it is not like automatic writing where something takes hold of her hand. She's just able to sit down and she writes them. She has page after page of this particular stuff.
It's incredible. Unfortunately, we are about out of time. We are out of time, but I must ask you, if they were to come back, would you go with them?
If they wouldn't put me through the physical examination, probably yes, but other than that, no.
Needless to say, this is an absolutely incredible story. Whether or not you believe in UFOs and close encounters of the third kind, I think you will agree, ladies and gentlemen, that this is an absolutely incredible revelation. Again, it is in a book called The Andreasson Affair. It is the documented investigation of a woman's abduction aboard a UFO. Our guests on K-Earth and Transition have been Betty Andreasson and UFO investigator Ray Fowler. Thank you both very much.
Thank you for having us.
Access. The documented investigation of a woman's abduction aboard a UFO. Such things that the dreams are made of, and that's probably the problem then. When someone looks at this, they go, okay, it's a novel, but it really isn't.
No, it isn't. I must admit, when I first heard about the case, I had misgivings about even getting involved with it.
Let's set up the background first. Raymond Fowler, your involvement with the world of UFOs.
Yes, I'm presently serving as Director of Investigations for an international group called MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, which hails from Seguin, Texas, right in our own backyards.
You don't sound like from Seguin, though.
No, I'm from New England, one in Massachusetts. I've been involved in UFO research for a number of years. My interest goes back to 1947. I served as an early warning coordinator for the United States Air Force-sponsored University of Colorado project in 1966-67 time frame. So I've been with it a long time, and this particular case is very bizarre as compared to some of the other types of work I've done in the UFO field.
What initially sparked your interest in the UFO field anyway? And did you go into this as a, point of curiosity, an adversary position? Were you out hoping they were there or proving that they really weren't?
Well, I must admit, I was probably only about 15 years old when Kenneth Arnold sighted these flying objects over Mount Rainier, Washington in 1947, June 24th, 1947, and I began collecting news clips thinking that they were experimental aircraft because I was interested in that kid interest stuff. But when I joined the United States Air Force and become involved with the National Security Agency, I came across people in reports that indicated that the United States Air Force was considering UFOs to be very serious business. So I took it upon myself when I was discharged from the United States Air Force to join the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena as an associate member just to keep abreast of what was going on in the world of UFOs. But my interest got to the point where I began to conduct investigations myself and sending unsolicited reports to the Air Force and NICAP, and before you know it, I got involved on a on-the-job training program with NICAP as an investigator and things sort of snowballed, and now they say I'm a UFO expert. That was many years ago.
Let's come up to date now then, and this case. How did you first get involved in this?
I reside in the state of Massachusetts, and the Massachusetts group got involved with the case through Dr. J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Study. My first impulse was not to get involved. It was very, very bizarre. However, the Massachusetts State Director indicated to me that the woman seemed to be all there, and that it was a very interesting case. So I became a member of a 5-man team. It consisted of an aerospace engineer, a solar physicist, a communications specialist, an electrical engineer, and myself. We conducted a very rigid character reference check on the family. 2 extensive lie detector tests were given to 2 of the primary witnesses. The abductee was given a psychiatric examination, not only to assure us that she was not a psychotic, but to assure her, because much of this came out under hypnosis, and she couldn't believe that such a thing could have happened to her, and thought that she was actually losing her mind, and wanted to be reassured and to seek medical attention if this was something wrong with her. But I came to the conclusion that from these various tests that these people were telling the truth as they knew it to be, and they were honest. And what intrigues me is that we have about 200 cases like this on record, and there are subtle similarities which exist in these cases, which come from all over the world, which make me feel that the close encounter of the third kind type G, as we call it, are real bona fide experiences. The apparent stimulus seems to be extraterrestrial. Might be much more complex than that. However, all we can do at the present time is to document cases like this and just wonder what it's all about.
The situation of hypnosis, let's kind of go into the incident then with the woman, because was hypnosis used because she either was leery of what she consciously thought happened, or she couldn't recall everything that happened, or was this just an investigative tool on your part?
This is an investigative tool. You'll find that most close encounters of the third kind type G UFO experience, seeing a UFO and its occupants at very close range, but having a missing time, as it were, a time period which they can't account for afterwards. In the case of the Andreasson affair, let's go back to the date that it happened. January 25th, 1967, about 6:35 p.m. Betty and her 7 children and 2 parents were visiting to help her care for the children because her husband was in the hospital, were at their home in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts. The children and her parents were in the living room. The lights in the house went out momentarily. A bright orange flash came through the kitchen window, which overlooked a field, and began pulsating. And the children became very frightened. She shooed them into the living room. The father came running out, looked out the window, the back window, to see where the light was coming from, and he described in his own way some small childlike beings that looked like kids dressed up in strange costumes coming toward the house. All he remembers after that is somehow they got in the house. The rest of the family went into, for want of a better description, suspended animation, which really shook up Betty. She wanted to be assured that her family was all right, and they let the younger daughter, who was 11 years old at the time, out of this state, as it were. And she lived under hypnosis a very complimentary experience, as it were, from her standpoint, talking, using the vocabulary and the description of 11-year-olds. Okay, now you say they let. You mean what did she, appeal to the beings? I'm worried about my family. Yes. They said, okay, well, let somebody they established, she heard voices in her head. The mouth didn't move. We'll probably be seeing some of the visuals later on, but she described them as 3 to 4 foot high with a large pear-shaped head, wraparound eyes, small nose, mouth, and the mouth was almost like scar tissue. Just to go very briefly through what happened, it's a very complex and detailed thing indeed.
But up to this point, though, you have one other family member corroborating.
There are 3. Right? There are 3 now. But that's about all that could be remembered. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like a bad dream to Becky. They couldn't believe something like this happened. They discussed it over the years, and when Dr. J. Allen Hynek, through, I think, Associated Press article, indicated that he would like to hear from people who've had UFO experiences, they weren't even sure this was a UFO experience at the time.
They sort of keep this to themselves for a while?
Yes, they kept it to themselves for a long time. But getting back to the experience, what happened was they convinced her, through mind control, to follow them. She was brought out to the backyard, taken aboard a small 20-25 foot in diameter craft, taken apparently to a larger craft and subjected to a number of physical, what seemed to be physical examinations, and then was put in a container filled with liquid. And she was tubes came into her mouth and her nose, allowing her to breathe. And while she was in this glass chair filled with liquid, they apparently took her someplace.
Okay, now that is this picture here, right?
That's right. That would be a good time to take a look at that.
A picture of this from someone, and we can see what Raymond's talking about.
Bear in mind, we're dealing with a woman that has only 10 years of formal education and married the boy next door and had 7 children, one after the other. She really didn't know what UFOs were all about.
Now, these are her drawings.
Those are her drawings. She's an amateur artist, and she has a remarkable talent to remember things in detail. Of course, under hypnosis, she relived this experience which we were just describing. Well, when they took her out of that particular chair, they floated her down a black track which ran between the chairs, if you'd like to show that. There are 8 chairs there, 4 on each side, and she was subjected to several of these chairs, and then she was floated down the middle of these chairs, down a black track, and a door just appeared. And this is the typical thing that was happening in there, and they went down a very, very dark tunnel, which seemed to be hewn out of solid rock, and emerged on the other side into a very, very large place where she underwent some very strange experiences and was brought back and went through the various things that she had gone through before she had entered this alien realm, as it were, and was returned to the house. When she returned to the house, the 2 aliens, whatever we might call them, brought 2 glowing balls with them, and when they entered the kitchen area, one of them went up to the father, who was still at the window, and motionless, really, and they held the ball in front of him, and he shuffled by her. Under hypnosis, she's screaming for her father, and the father just ignores her, walks right back, shuffles right by her into the living room, and every member of the family was taken to bed in this sort of state, unaware of her yelling at them and so forth, and then she was put to bed, and it was the next morning. It's very typical of other cases we have on file.
What was the time period involved here?
We feel it took place between 6:35 and perhaps 11 o'clock in the evening. The younger daughter under hypnosis noticed the clock was read 6:35, and Betty, when she was returned to the house, noticed the clock reading 10:40. It's interesting, you can go back to January 25th, 1967, as they're reliving this, and you can ask questions like how the weather was, how much snow was there on the ground, what was the temperature, what was on TV, the power blackout, and things like that. And we went back and checked local weather records, power company records, and many of the things, in fact, all of the things they described that happened on that day could be checked. A lot of these things, which indicated at least through hypnosis, they were reliving that particular day. Yeah.
Let's take our this break, get it out of the way. We'll be back in 2 minutes. The engineer that was taking the thoughts from the lady and trying to put them together and what that craft might really look like. Could you hit on that again?
Yeah. One of the investigating team is an aerospace engineer, is a manager at the Raytheon company, holds a very good position there, a very skilled individual. And he was playing the devil's advocate, as we all were, trying to find something in this story that would indicate that it really didn't happen. We were being very objective about this, and he asked her to describe each compartment, each room that she entered, the way she entered, and the general size of the room, the shape, and so forth. And he came out with like a lot of pieces of a picture puzzle and was able to put them together into a very logical, coherent, circular craft, just as she had described it. One of his sketches are in the book. There were a number of sketches he was able to do. Speaking of sketches, one of the unique things about the book, The Andreasson Affair, is that she is an amateur artist, but a very excellent amateur artist, and she was given a post-hypnotic suggestion to remember in detail the various things that she saw. And she has given us, in the book and in the report, which is about 528 pages long, 3 volumes, a series of drawings giving a sort of a chronicle survey, as it were, of her trip through the craft. They're very, very detailed. One wonders how someone with a 10th grade education could ever concoct something like that on her own. They were just too detailed.
Well, let's look at this. It's the last picture really that we have of one of the little people. One thing about this, I wondered if Steven Spielberg got a copy of this or something, because obviously we're using the term Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and the little fellow here, or do we know what they were? Were they it? Well, was there a male-female situation? But it looks like it's so much like the characters in Close Encounters in the film.
It definitely would be. Dr. J. Allen Hynek was technical director for the film, and much of the material that went into the film was drawn from cases like the Andreasson Affair, and they came up with a composite of what people have described as aliens. The term close encounter of the third kind, for example, was coined by Hynek many years ago and was used in the film.
In your areas of research, other people that have had somewhat similar experiences, is there any thread of similarity, though, as far as description of beings that they've seen, description of spacecraft?
Yes, in fact, United States Air Force Academy text that was being used at the Air Force Academy back in 1968 indicates the most commonly reported alien is just about what Mrs. Andreasson described. 3 to 4 foot high, large head, wraparound eyes, slit for mouth, the telepathic communication. We had a case involving an Air Force Master Sergeant getting away from the housewife type of sighting that belongs to the Air Force's Human Reliability Program. And this group consists of a very select group of people in the United States Air Force that have passed psychiatric exams and so forth. So the cream of the crop of the Air Force. And he went outside of Holloman Air Force Base to watch a meteor shower on his way home from a night shift. And he had an experience very similar to Betty Andreasson's experience. Same type of occupants, the fact that they didn't walk, they floated, and an abduction experience being put on a similar examination table given a physical examination. There are a number of people from various walks of life. There are about 200 reports that we have on file at the Center for UFO Studies that involve close encounters of the third kind type G, where people report on-board experiences. And many of the similarities which exist between these reports are very subtle, in some cases never been published before. And this sort of serves as a check from our point of view on the apparent, I say apparent because we don't have proof of validity, that these cases have a common stimulus, which seems on the surface to be extraterrestrial, but you can't prove that. It might be more complex than that. And the best we can do is to take the tools of science which we do have with lack of physical evidence in the case of the Andreasson affair and apply them just like a criminologist would do in dealing with a criminal. Again, the background checks, the lie detector tests, the hypnotic regression, the psychiatric exam, and as many tools as we can apply to cases like this, which at least have convinced us that the experience is real, and that the people believe that the experience is real, that they've actually experienced this, and that they seem to be honest, industrious, very credible people who describe something totally incredible and outside of rational world.
Right. By virtue of doing investigations that put you, like say, in an adversary position going in, and then trying to maintain your objectivity. But now, personally, okay, we believe, obviously you believe that she believes this happened.
That's right.
But do you believe it really happened?
I can't prove it, but I just have a very, very, very strong feeling based upon the evidence, not the proof, but the evidence that has been accumulated from, as I say, about 200 cases involving people from various walks of life, from other countries, describe something very, very similar to what the Andreasson family experienced. It's very hard for me not to take such cases into account. Then you have a host of other type of UFO sightings. For example, you have the case where someone sees a UFO similar to what Mrs. Andreasson saw, which leaves physical indentations behind in the ground, which penetrometers indicate maybe you had a ton or two from that object sitting in the ground, or traces, electromagnetic effects. No hypnosis needed. These people see this object. There are effects left behind. An experience like the Andreasson affair is just a step further. She not only saw the craft, the occupants, but she was brought aboard. There's a similarity, a similar thread that runs through all kinds of UFO reports other than the close encounters of the third kind.
Let me take a step further and get the last break out of the way, fortunately, and then we'll be back. Do you personally believe they're there?
I believe after competent investigation that although 80% can be explained away in terms of natural phenomena or man-made objects and a few hoaxes, relatively speaking, that there exists a residue of about 20% which remain unexplained after investigation.
That's a problem because by the nature of the beast, a UFO is really it documented that a lot of people saw it, but it's not really documented that yet it is because here's a big piece of it.
Mm-hmm. There are cases on file, for example, that we have that involve close encounters of the second kind, which do involve physical traces. Physical traces which in no way could have been made by the witnesses involved. As I say, you can take an instrument like a penetrometer and we find that whatever sat there weighed several tons, and whatever made the baked area in the ground, you would have have to have some kind of a microwave generator to do something like this.
Logically, there's got to be life somewhere else, but wouldn't it be so much easier, all of us, if one of these would kind of, I don't know, walk up in the middle of the Astrodome and go, "Hi there, well, we've decided to talk to everybody."
For putting it in reverse, I think that NASA, and looking at a report I'd seen that NASA had written a long time ago, that it would be a very, very long process that they would go through. They would discover life.
Yeah.
And it would be a very long conditioning process, but before they would actually really become part of the experience over its large over
That's
scale.
logical, too, if you see what our lifestyle is like, right? Time has gotten away from us. Remember it. It should be somewhere near you, the Andreasson Affair. Have a good day. Join us tomorrow. Raymond, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having us.